Hey friends, I'm Christy Hughes and you're listening to Rock the Damn Boat. If you've ever bitten your tongue to keep the peace or said yes when every part of you wanted to say no, this one's for you. We're diving into the messy, real conversations that people pleasers like me have spent years avoiding. It's time to have the hard conversations, shake things up, and learn to stand tall, even when it makes waves. And before we dive into the topic of today's Sunday Shortie, I just want to remind you that we are 2 weeks away from the Rise and Thrive retreat. I have a dozen women joining me on the Hideaway Ranch in Bluffdale, Texas. And if you would like to spend a weekend in nature, working through things like not necessarily super emphatic goal setting, but more like inviting in anything that 2026 wants to bring to you, even if that's more relaxation or, like me, a reclamation of things that I used to enjoy doing before I got so caught up in the hustle and bustle of corporate America, then I would love for you to join me. Saturday passes are $333 and weekend lodging starts at $555. So it's a really affordable weekend retreat, includes all your meals and priceless memories. All right, today, where is my mind? We finished Stranger Things. So I don't know who all watched the entire Stranger Things saga. Might have been a little creepy or scary for some of you, but we definitely enjoyed it. And I especially loved the music that came along with this. Well, actually, all the seasons. Now, this last season in particular, I was not a big Tiffany fan back in the 80s. My friends were. I was, if you say Team Tiffany versus Team Debbie, I was Team Debbie. But really, I started to listen to a lot of alternative music because my half brother is 9 years older than me. He introduced me to all kinds of cool college radio station music. So every time he came to visit, he would bring me a new mixtape. I treasured those tapes. And one of the bands that he introduced me to was the Pixies. So hearing the Pixies on the last episode of Stranger Things really transported me back to a completely different time in my life. The haunting melodies, their vocals, I just really liked that music and that whole genre of alternative music. We called it new wave at the time. So I was a new waver back in the day, wore a lot of black, but I did love the Pixies. The song Where Is My Mind was originally released in 1988, which means that I was 13 years old. I was on the verge of what would become a lifelong mental health struggle. I realized, looking back at that time, by the time I hit 14, I was really starting to journal about things that were heavy and dark. And I won't get into that on this Sunday Shortie episode, but what I will say is the recognition that I was starting these struggles in adolescence, puberty, 13, 14, 15. It's no surprise to me then that menopause and being 50 and the mental health challenges that I am having right now mirror what was happening at a time in my life where the hormones were coming on strong and everything was changing. And I think by the time as women and maybe men, we get to this age now, midlife, we forget how rocky puberty was. And for a lot of kids, and probably more boys than girls, things like body odor and acne and all of these things that were happening in boys' bodies. And for girls, we were becoming more emotional. And all of these changes culminate in junior high and high school and make for such a challenging time. Well, fast forward to your 50s and you're starting to exit that entire chapter of your life where certain hormones were at the forefront. and we're ruling how you interacted with other people. So my guest in a couple of weeks will be talking to us about what midlife does as it relates to removing your filter. But today I wanted to share on a more personal level what it looks like for me. It is timely because I go tomorrow for a 4-hour mental health assessment. My symptoms right now in menopause present like ADHD, at least from what I've been seeing about ADHD symptoms. They're all there. The squirrel brain, the processing time, the forgetfulness, they would be minor if they were just happening on occasion, but this happens from moment to moment. So I forget things, I walk off, I leave things unfinished. It's very frustrating. Going back to ages 13, 14, 15, stranger things transporting me back in my life to that time and seeing what symptoms looked like then that might be ADHD related, they are there. And one of the biggest concepts that relates to ADHD is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. RSD is a condition that isn't specifically diagnosable, but it's being rejected by someone and having a very extreme response to it. And that is typically linked to ADHD. When I look back at that time in my life, if a boy that I liked did not like me, it was the end of the world. I was devastated. And I'll just give a brief trigger warning here because I've talked about the scars on my arms before. I was rejected by a boy, or he chose another friend of mine instead of me, and I cut my arms because I didn't know any other way to release that intense emotion that I was feeling over being rejected. That was RSD. We did not have a name for it then. And I think that Gen X, and especially Gen X women, as we're getting more and more diagnosis around ADHD, autism, these other mental health challenges, we just didn't have a name for them in 1985 or 1990. I was always diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and those are the two big ones. And there were some pretty big umbrella conditions. So certainly it's not as if I didn't have symptoms of those two things. But as there's more research done around mental health, we can take that a layer deeper so that I'm not taking an anxiety medication if I'm better served by an ADHD medication, which is why I'm going for this huge mental health assessment. Some people might ask me, and some people actually have asked me, well, what is this going to benefit you? I've even been a little bit vocal about not labeling conditions because I do think that mindfulness practices like breath work, yoga, meditation, those practices are the cure-all for many of these conditions. So I don't necessarily want to jump straight to medication, but I know myself well enough to know that I need to get a handle on how I'm feeling right now and make the space and create a new baseline, possibly with medication, that will put me into a more regulated state to be able to implement these practices. Sometimes we get so worked up in our brains that it's impossible to feel like those tools will ever help. I've been there. I'm not necessarily right there right now, but I do want to see if ADHD or autism or another diagnosis comes forward that will help me understand how to treat those specific symptoms and not just use the catch-all anxiety diagnosis. Looking into the neuroscience behind it, it also helps us understand why people-pleasing is so predominant among those of us with neurodivergence. And I love that there's also different language being used around that. I have started following Neuromagic Amy. Every post that she makes is about me. I feel like her and I lived the same childhood. She'll be a guest on the pod soon. So I'm loving that I found her at a time when I needed that type of information. However you want to call it, there is a different way that our brain processes when we are ADHD, diagnosed with anxiety disorder, mood disorder, depression, any of those things. At its core is dopamine, and dopamine is our reward center. So when we people please, we get rewarded with a little hit of dopamine. And what I love about this is you can also find that reward from volunteering, from doing something kind for others. Going to 12-step meetings, the first thing they said was to be of service. So when you volunteer or you do something kind for others, you get that dopamine hit. You do not have to be bowing down to someone else's wishes. You could simply volunteer. You get that same result. Now, dopamine is released. It rewards our brain. The other thing at play is the amygdala. So the amygdala overreacts to disapproval. It is related to the fight or flight response. And please keep in mind, I am not a neuroscientist. I'm not a therapist. I'm just speaking from what the Google tells me. So the amygdala overreacts to disapproval. And when it is so ingrained in our behavior, and especially in neurodivergent people, it overrides the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logic. So that's our logical brain. Our amygdala lives back in our fight or flight reptilian brain. So think about the I cannot say prefrontal cortex. Think about the PC being where you process things and you have a logical reaction. And when our amygdala overrides that, we live in this constant fight or flight, fawn or freeze state. Now, I consider myself an empath. I love connecting with people. I love being compassionate and leading with my heart. From the research that I've done, and I've read a book called The Empath's Survival Guide. I believe it's Judith Orloff. She talks about how empathic people, science has shown that they have more mirror neurons than the general public. Having more mirror neurons means that I literally feel similarly to someone who's talking to me. So if they're sad, I'm sad. Put me in New York for a week, I'm likely to have a New York accent by the end of the week. Now, that doesn't mean I was good at it. So those are all of the things that can be happening in our neurospicy brain to cause us to people please. If you are constantly feeling ruled by other people's reactions to you, by the fear of rejection, by the fear of what people might do or how they might react, know that there is a little part of your brain that is overreacting to that disapproval. The beauty of that awareness, it is possible to rewire your brain. Now, I didn't even bring up trauma, which is a huge part of conditioning in our lives. It's easy to say, here's the science behind it. But if you had trauma or social conditioning or an upbringing that made your fear response even more hypersensitive, that definitely will affect all of this response throughout the rest of your life. So by learning a little bit more about how my brain processes things, I hope to be able to implement the right tools, possibly the right medication, and create a new baseline for myself that makes overwhelm and my forgetfulness a little bit more manageable. Because if I had to say, I'm very happy right now. I'm happy with the decision that I made to leave corporate. I am loving coaching. I am in the midst of a coaching cohort right now. I lead a retreat in 2 weeks. I am beyond excited about helping other women reframe how they feel about things that might be holding them back. But these little hindrances that I have throughout the day, things like walking off and forgetting to put a new trash bag liner in the trash can or forgetting the laundry for hours on end, my reaction to that is shame, and I get frustrated with myself. So if I can work backwards to create healthy habits that mean I'm taking care of those things in the moment, that I am focusing my brain on whatever task is right in front of me, then I think that I will feel even freer. And when I'm here recording on the podcast, I love being in this flow. And this is one of the times where I am the most present. And yes, I might edit out some little blips and bobbles and bloopers, but for the most part, I like to just hit record and talk and see where it goes. So when I think about something that is creative and puts me in a flow state, this podcast absolutely does that for me. I am done because it's a Sunday Shortie, and I just wanted to capture your attention for 15 minutes or so just to recap. First of all, go listen to the Pixies if you are a child of the 80s. Love it. Loving revisiting the Pixies. So where is my mind? It is being rewarded by dopamine. It is being driven by my amygdala, who wants to avoid rejection and disapproval at all costs. And when it's really in control, it overrides my prefrontal cortex, which is my logical brain. As an empath, I have really strong mirror neurons, and as a potential ADHDer, I have always had intense rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD. So I will get an official diagnosis. I had to fill out about 20 questionnaires to prepare for the appointment, and it's going to be all morning in Fort Worth. Honestly, I'm excited. And not because I want to label myself in any particular way, but because I'm really curious about how my brain operates. And I think that that's the stigma that we are breaking as Gen X by going out and getting these late diagnoses, is to say, hey, we just want to understand our brain better. And where we used to blame menopause, yes, it's menopause, and it's also changes to our brain chemistry that could be different than anything we've ever experienced before. And so how do we improve our quality of life now that we are living longer? I mean, 50 arguably is just getting started. We're just coming into our own. We are coming into embodying who we truly are. And so to be thriving for the next 30, 40 years, I want to make sure that these little things that can be detrimental to my emotional health are addressed. So I will keep you posted. Maybe next Sunday I will have an update for you. This Wednesday, be sure and tune in for Dawn Frechette, who will be sharing her breast cancer journey. Cancer is absolutely rampant in our society today too. We will be discussing not only the prevalence of it, but also the treatments that are available today and the different lifestyle changes that you can make. Hit the subscribe or the follow button, and I would love to see you back for Wednesday's episode. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Rock the Damn Boat, a podcast produced and recorded by Christy Hughes. You can follow, subscribe on both Apple and Spotify, and your 5-star review goes a long way. Thank you so much for your support of the show.